Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Thursday, August 6th, 2026, episode 566. And we're going to talk about a bunch of things that were on my mind: pro-war Jews, the unipolar moment, and Lord Acton. So, just scrolling through my news feed, and generally, I try not to look too closely because so much of it is just so upsetting what other people are posting, especially given the context of the times right now of just how bad things are going, and yet certain people get to revel and rejoice in their ignorance, celebrating horrible events, as if these horrible events were a positive for the world and society. In particular, pro-war Jews in the United States, unbelievable. I'm kind of shocked. So I recognize the subjectivity of it all, but these people are supposedly intellectuals. I taught in the same program with them, and maybe they're falling victim to their own democratic socialist mentality. Or maybe it's their own arrogance. They think so highly of themselves that they never ever question any of the conclusions, any of their prejudices that they have. So, to give you an example of what I mean, they hate Trump. Generally speaking, they absolutely loathe him. But where does it come from? I always wonder. And I think a lot of it has to do with just simple party loyalty because they don't really care uh, if someone on their side says similar things, albeit a little bit more politely. But I mean, there's no difference in my mind between the candidates they favor and someone like a Trump. But on the other hand, they should love him because of all the recent presidents, including Obama, who they love as well, refused to go to war with Israel. That is to say, Israel kept trying to get the United States to go into a war, to start a war with various countries, especially Iran. And all the other presidents of the United States in the recent past have said no. But Trump said yes. And so all these people who supposedly really, really hate Trump for who he is should actually love him, or at least they should soften their anger against him because they are doing something, he's doing something that they like, that is helping Israel expand. And so if he is helping Israel and they hate Trump, well, doesn't it make them anti-Semites, anti-Semites? I've flubbed that word. And if you read through their news feed, it's shocking how they cherry pick propaganda to justify Israel's expansionism. I mean, it really is kind of it boggles my mind how they can just simply sit there and just cherry pick information. Scholars, people who had to teach other people how to write papers, analytical papers, and yet they cherry pick propaganda. It's mind-boggling. And these are the kinds of people who populate many a faculty on any level of education. And the crazy thing is, on top of it all, like the crowning failure of these people is that they themselves will never, ever, ever think of picking up a gun and going and fighting for the things that they believe in. They would never do it. They would never even send their kids to do it. They never would. It never crosses their mind, right? Like, oh, I'm contributing to the war effort in a different way is the kind of chicken, cowardly excuse that they're going to put forth, because they expect someone else to do the fighting for them. And it's just so disgusting that way. But then, how many wars has the US won? In my mind, World War II, but it was an allied effort. And basically, the US is always losing. Sometimes it takes 20 years for people to figure out that the US has lost. But in my mind, if you to win a war means that whatever government takes control after the war is over, if it's a stable government, if it's a government that is pro-peace, that is popular with the people, then okay, we'll say that you won. And if that's the criteria, then the US hasn't won a war since World War II. And even that is becoming suspect with the unraveling of NATO and the increased aggression with Russia. So was that even a victory as well? And I'm talking long term, right? Imagine someone reading history 1,000 years from now, what they would say about World War I and World War II, given especially if those two wars were studied in the context of whatever happens next. And so the US always loses. And but at the same time, without the United States, Israel would be toast. I mean, Ukraine would be toast. I mean, it's the dollars that are uh, propping up Israel right now. And some of the people I listen to say that the damage that Israel sustained in the first few months of the war was a lot greater than people are saying, which is why there's a total news blackout in Israel. I mean, because it's really supposedly really, really bad there. Well, if it's this bad now, with if the US was gone, what would happen to Israel? And the reality that people don't consider that all they're thinking about is the dream of expansion. It's just it blows my mind. So these same people also believe that Putin is so evil that he has to be taken down. These same people are the ones who still trust Fauci. Um, Perhaps if they're lucky, they'll realize that they were wrong before they die. You know, if a topic like this had come up in class, I would point out their motto, which is never forget, never again. But they forgot already. And if they claim to remember, they misunderstood the lesson. And they have become the very Nazis that they supposedly positioned themselves against. I mean, look at the people in the Ukraine that we were supporting. They were clearly Nazis. And you know, with the genocide going on right now, I mean, they've taken the role of the Nazis, right? And it's that weird uh postmodern thing where since I'm doing it, it means it's okay now. You can't call me a Nazi because I'm doing it now. It's very weird. So even libertarian leaning Jews that I know suddenly become fascists when it comes to Israel. Uh, it's weird, and it reminds me of the question I used to get when I was a kid, where people would say, "Well, if we went to war with Korea, whose side would you be on?" And I was like, "You're an idiot for asking me that question, right?" And in my head, it was because we're never going to go to war with Korea. But an interesting situation is a lot of those people who would ask me were Jews. And now it's like, well, Israel is interfering with pretty much everything that's going on here in the United States. Whose side do they take? And clearly the answer is Israel. And so, you know, 50 years later, remembering all the grief and the harassment that I got from people because the skin color was different. Now looking at these guys now, realizing that they were being completely subjective is pretty mind-boggling. But anyway, there's that. Some thoughts on what's going on with some things that I saw on social media. I was listening to Glenn Deason talking to Colonel Wilkerson, and they were talking about the unipolar moment uh, right after the fall of the Soviet Union, and the United States was the single global military power at the time. That was a unipolar moment, a one pole, as opposed to multipolar, several um, powers that you know had to constantly work and negotiate and cooperate, collaborate. make agreements with each other to coexist. And the unipolar moment was when the US is basically the 500-pound gorilla, and they can do whatever he can do whatever he wants. But the unipolar moment was supposed to be for peace, right? You got rid of all of the big rivalries that burned through Europe and Asia, all those millennia. And now all of a sudden it's over. And so now you have a new power who is the only power after the Cold War. And it was an opportunity for peace. But of course, because of human nature, rampant corruption, the so-called international rule-based order just collapsed, right? It was all pretend because on the face of it, they were like, oh yeah, let's have a international rule-based order so that we all follow the rules and so peace will be preserved. Well, that was the face, but in reality, um, a lot of people were saying, well, they have to remain weak. We have to preserve our rule and superiority over the world. And in order for this to happen, we have to make sure that people like Russia, Russians, the Chinese, uh, the Iranians, they have to stay weak. And so you see a lot of CIA, the rise of the CIA, the rise of black ops, covert operations, primarily to weaken other countries. So basically interfering with other countries, destabilizing them to make sure that they are weak. And this is also the recipe for Africa. A lot of meddling in Africa. Burkina Faso was in the news a year ago, a year or two ago, and how they rejected the French. I think that potential is all throughout the continent of Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa. It's very possible, even likely. And for the longest time, people in the West have looked down on Africa, I think because they're black, but because they were so easily manipulated and bribed and controlled by the wealth that the West used to have, the technological superiority. But if you've seen some of the documentaries I've seen, in the way that Iran surprised the West with their technological prowess, Africa will do the same. I believe that. In their discussion, they talked about General Harold Kuyat, spelled with a J. In German, J is a Y sound, so Kuyat, Kujat. He used to be NATO chief general, also highest general in the German army, Bundeswehr. Uh, and they talk about how diplomacy died. Now, I went and I listened to that interview that Glenn Deason did with General Kuyat. It was from 10 months ago. And, basically he said he went through and said exactly what the pundits I've been listening to have been saying, that early in the Ukraine-Russian war, they had negotiated a peace. And then here comes Boris Johnson from England, sent by the United States, to say, do not accept that deal. We're going to have war. And so the war is the point, right? Winning is beside the point. Just keep the war going. And this is the death of diplomacy. No longer are nations going to try to talk to each other. Instead, you dissolve diplomacy. You get rid of the diplomats, and all you have is coercion. All you have is military force. This is why we have rampant militarism here in the United States. It's like a military state without being a military state. And the recent episode I did on Send Me, the new slogan, I guess, of military recruitment here in the United States, Send Me, is indicative, I think, of this death of diplomacy that these guys were talking about. And diplomacy that is the relations of nations. What do we have instead of countries talking to other countries? You have 2 billion people under U.S. Economic sanctions. Can you imagine when the United States collapses financially, when the dollar collapses, what those 2 billion people are going to do to Americans all over the world? It's going to be ugly. It is seriously going to be ugly. Uh, I'm sure it would be very location specific when it comes to hostility towards Americans, but uh, I I keep saying it'd be interesting, and I would not be at all surprised if you see raiding parties from other countries coming in and kidnapping former presidents, former congressmen, um, to put on trial in other countries for the war crimes, for the crimes that they committed over the years. And I'd be kind of amused to see people like Obama and Clinton be put on trial on the global stage, televised, uh, and for people in America to freak out and not even understand what the heck is going on. In other words, there's going to be a fallout to all of this aggression. What is it going to be? I do not know. I That's the worst case scenario for other countries to come here and start taking people. The best case scenario is for people just to ignore America, and the United States has no one to trade with, and so they're going to have to rediscover freedom. How long that will take, I do not know. Wilkerson mentioned the gambler's fallacy. If we could just go to war with Iran one more time, if we just have another bombing campaign, this time we'll do it right. Well, sorry guys, out of ammunition, right? All the smart weapons that they're using now require rare earth minerals, including gallium, right? Larry Johnson makes a big deal out of that. Well, China supplies it. Why would you, as a country, supply the very materials that are required to construct the weapons that America is planning on using against you? Yeah, you would never do that. And pity all of the allies of the United States as well, because these rare earth minerals are used for other non-military uses, but because they can be converted to military use, like say, I don't know, a new kind of MRI machine requires rare earth minerals, but you sold it for medical equipment, but then the government comes along and seizes it to make more weapons. Yeah, you're not going to allow continued trade in those weapons, in those rare earths that can be turned into weapons. So uh, US has no ammo left, has no ammunition left, and yet they keep saying that they're going to increase the violence against them. It doesn't make any sense at all. And all of those pro-war Jews just it amazes me how ignorant they are, and how arrogant they are, how much they've drunk the Kool-Aid of the American military superiority. Um, yeah, it's just interesting. Which brings me to the final topic of the day, which is Lord Acton's famous quotation: "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." And it came to me yesterday. As I was thinking about these topics, and I thought, hey, you know what? I've heard that quote a lot, but I don't know anything about Lord Acton, and I don't know anything about the context. Like, why would he write that? So I did a little bit of Googling, and just to give you an introduction, so in case you're interested, you can do more research. But I got this from the Acton Institute website. So Lord Acton, his full name, and the whole Lord Baron stuff and how their name changes once they're appointed to a position of nobility. I really don't get that too much. It's hard for me to understand. But his name is John Emmerich Edward Dahlberg. And because he was made a baron, he's Lord Acton. Whatever. Okay, so 1834 and died in 1902. And this quote comes from a letter that he had written in 1887. So that puts him at about 50. 53 years old. 53 years old. He writes this letter to a clergyman, and they're debating how people should be remembered in history. Like when you write history, how do you portray leaders of the church, leaders of nations, politicians, bureaucrats? How do you talk about them as you write the history? And apparently, the British clergyman said that, oh, you have to portray them as heroes. And so Lord Acton then responds to this. And Lord Acton was a historian, and they make a point to include that he was a historian of liberty. He considered political liberty the essential condition and guardian of religious liberty. And so he was a very religious person at the same time. And obviously, someone with a lot of integrity, because he said that we need political liberty, freedom, so that we can have religious liberty, which is a big deal, which should be always a big deal. If you, as I keep saying, religion is anything that you believe is true, climate science, if that's what you want to believe, or Fauci science, if that's what you want to believe in. Well, in order to do that, you need religious liberty. But if you have this liberty, then you cannot put the kibosh on anyone else's beliefs. So Fauci would say, oh, you got to wear two masks. Well, that's his position. If you want to believe it, fine, wear two masks. But I also have the freedom to reject that. And calling it science doesn't make it any less religion than it actually is. Okay. So here's the letter that he had written. I'm going to read it. It's not that long. I cannot accept your canon that we are to judge Pope and King unlike other men, with a favorable presumption that they did no wrong. In other words, when you write your history about popes, leaders of the church and government, that you start with the assumption that they didn't do anything wrong, that everything they did was okay. If there is any presumption, it is the other way against holders of power, increasing as the power increases. Historic responsibility has to make up for the want of legal responsibility. And so basically, since a lot of these leaders are free from liability, there is no scrutiny, there's no prosecution of crimes by them. So then it is history's responsibility to be very, very critical. The more powerful they are, you have to be even more critical of their policies, the things that they did, the decisions that they made to expose anything that they did wrong. Read on. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are almost always bad men, even when they exercise influence and not authority. Still more when you superadd the tendency or the certainty of corruption by authority. And that's a theme that I've been hitting on lately, that the more power you have, the risk and probability of corruption increases exponentially. I continue. There is no worse heresy than that the office sanctifies the holder of it. Like somehow by becoming president now, you can do no wrong. Or if you're a pope, you can do no wrong. That is the point at which the negation of Catholicism and the negation of liberalism meet and keep high festival. And the end learns to justify the means. And we talked about that Machiavellian phrase before. You would hang a man of no position like Ravaillac. I don't know who that is. But if what one hears is true, then Elizabeth asked the gaoler to murder Mary, her sister, in prison, and William III ordered his Scots minister to extirpate a clan, to eradicate, to murder an entire clan. Here are the greater names coupled with the greater crimes. You would spare these criminals for some mysterious reason. I would hang them higher than Haman for reasons of quite obvious justice. Still more, still higher for the sake of historical science. Well, so Haman was the guy who plotted against Mordecai in the book of Esther. And so basically, he was a bureaucrat and he was found guilty and he got hung on the gallows on, the hangman's noose on the very gallows he had made for the Jews in Persia. And so basically he's saying, Queen Elizabeth tried to murder her sister, and William III murdered an entire clan. You're going to let him get off on that? You're going to let him let that stuff be forgotten and, allow people to remain in their brainwashed state that these people are somehow noble, that they knew what they were up to. And I mentioned this earlier with Lindsey Graham, how you're not supposed to speak ill of the dead, but that's so that you can clean up their history. You can clean up their personal history to make them somehow more noble than they actually were. So, given what Lord Acton said, the unipolar moment never had a chance. It never had a chance because of all that power. The corruption was just going to be off the charts. So freedom would have been the way. Like if I was like supreme master of the universe at that unipolar moment, I would have said, okay, freedom is the order of the day, the rule of the day. But who has the courage and the integrity to do that when you know you're going to get death threats, people are going to try to assassinate you, right? Who would continue to say, yeah, yeah, freedom for everybody. And they're going to like load up on all the guilt, all the knowledge production to try to persuade you that no, 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 this is for a real good cause. You got to do this. So, fanatical belief in oneself or one's own subjectivity, that's how you make Hitlers. That's how you make dictators. And this is why so many people keep repeating the mistakes of the past, right? You get all these people like they're struggling to achieve something. They finally achieve it and they're like, oh, see, I deserve to rule. And so I'm going to carry out my dream, my plan. Well, yeah, see, that's how you create a dictator. And so in my own way, doing this podcast, the way I teach and preach, I'm trying to spread the word of freedom to help people remember and hopefully to understand better. Unlike some people who claim to want to never forget, never repeat, let's do that for real by focusing on freedom and focusing on the positive. That's it for today. I will talk to you next time.